This is Pod Populi.
Podcast for the people.
Welcome back to the Wedding Buzz. It's your host, Sydney, and today we're going to talk about the timeline trap, why poor planning can ruin your wedding day. One mistake in your wedding day timeline can lead to chaos. So here is how to avoid that disaster. Of course, I always like to say, don't let small things ruin your wedding day. It's your one wedding day. Don't let this one little bump in the road ruin the whole day. But think about it like a domino effect. When one thing goes wrong with your timeline specifically, it pushes everything else throughout the whole day. And when you don't plan your timeline correctly, it just causes chaos that we don't need on a wedding day. Your wedding day is one of the most important days of your life, but it's also one of the most complex in terms of logistics, and one small mistake in the timeline can, make the whole day unravel. Side note, this is why you hire a planner, because we do this again and again. And one, we know what to look out for in advance. And then two, God forbid if something happens, you have a team there to help you, navigate through it of no worries, we could do this, we could do that, rather than your family all panicking. But, if you don't have a planner, hopefully this can help you of things to look out for. And even if you do have a planner, this still might, give you ideas of what to ask your planner, what to look out for. I've talked about this in a few other episodes. I know a few weeks ago I was talking about my sister's wedding, and don't get me wrong, her wedding was gorgeous. The guests didn't even really know that anything was happening, but there wasn't enough time in the timeline for bustling her dress, which caused, caused some stress. It caused dinner to be a little bit late. And then at the end, she was in an area where there was a cutoff, like the town said there was no music past 10 o'clock. And so we had no choice to extend the day. It had to be over. And because dinner was pushed, that cut into the dancing, and everyone's having a blast, and then just boom, night's over. So again, it was fine. And it was honestly like a good problem to have, is everyone was having so much fun that they didn't want to stop. But because dinner was pushed back, we just got that fun dancing part was a little cut short. So let's make sure that you have a good timeline, and let's make sure that, things are planned accordingly so that you don't have bumps in the road, and we can avoid these things. So let's talk about mistakes that people make. Then I'm going to give you some tips, and then I'm going to talk about how I tackle timelines. So mistakes. What are some mistakes people make? Number one, they don't add buffer time. Guys, you always need buffer time. Things take longer than you think, especially on wedding day. Let's say the venue is 10 minutes away from the hotel where you're getting ready. So you put in the timeline 10 minutes. Because it takes all that time to pack up the hotel room, get in the elevator, go downstairs, load up the car, then the 10 minutes to get to the venue, and then you have to unload the car and settle into the bridal suite or whatever you're doing. Things take longer than you think. So I would put at least 30 minutes on the timeline for that. At least 30 minutes if it's a 10-minute drive time. You have to add buffer time. Things like on the timeline when you're doing a first look, you have to remember there's the time it takes to walk. If we're doing a first look, I have to get the bride in a certain spot and then the groom in a certain spot. And I need to get them both in those places without them seeing each other. So it takes a little bit of time, because I'm telling the groom, cover your eyes, walk this way, walk slow. I might walk someone around a building or something to get them in the right place without seeing each other. But guess what? This takes extra time. So add buffer time. The next thing is, I already kind of touched on it, but underestimating travel time. People underestimate it all the time. Think about parking, think about traffic, think about getting everyone organized. You have to add buffer time, and you have to add travel time. So if it's whatever travel time, extend it and then add buffer time. And let me tell you, if you have too much time, if you get somewhere early, no one's going to be like, oh, shoot, we're here early. No, it's great. Go to the bathroom, sit down, get a glass of water. You get to relax for a minute. Let me tell you, 5-10 minutes being early on a wedding day and having a minute to sit down and relax is a beautiful thing. So add buffer time, don't underestimate travel time. And then another mistake I see people make is when it comes to the first look, you have to remember, I know some people are super duper pro first look. I am in the middle. I logistically see its purpose, big time see its purpose, but I understand some people don't want to do the first look for traditional aspects. I totally get it. Here's what I'll say. If you don't want to do a first look, you need to make your cocktail hour at least an hour and a half. And that's where people fight me, is that they don't want to do a first look and then they don't want to make their cocktail hour an hour and a half. And I'm telling you, you have to. And I know the cocktail hour being an hour and a half kind of stinks because your bar package is going to start at the beginning of cocktail hour, which then makes your reception shorter. I would say it's worth it, well worth it, to pay to extend your reception to fit this in. I try to save people money as much as I can, but there are some places where when the money is going to, if it's like, let's add these flowers, I love flowers. I want your wedding to be as pretty as possible, but I'm not going to push you or really encourage you to spend money that you're not comfortable spending to have decor. I will push you when it comes to logistics, because when the logistics are wrong and the timeline is wrong, that's when chaos happens, and that's when you don't have a good wedding day. And that's when brides are stressed and freaking out. Every time. On the wedding day, if they don't have that extra flower arrangement, they're not going to be crying. They're not going to be freaking out. I never have a bride freaking out because she decided not to do this extra flower arrangement or something. But if they don't plan accordingly, or when they're running late, or they forgot something at their hotel room, or this or that, that's when brides are freaking out. And of course, if they have me and my team there, we're there to help make it as smooth as possible. And I have run back to their hotel room or run back to their house and done all this extra stuff to try to ease the day. But when the timeline is not accurate, that's when the day turns chaos and brides are upset, and that, that's gonna put a damper on your wedding day. So going back to this whole first look, if you can do the first look before, that'll help with your timeline. If you don't do a first look, you need to do an hour and a half cocktail hour. You have to. Please, I beg you, do an hour and a half cocktail hour. People think your guests are going to be so bored. What are they going to do? Feed them. That helps. Make sure there's a bar. That helps. Make sure there's seating. Don't make your guests, especially the women in heels, stand for an hour and a half. Make sure there's seating and maybe some entertainment. Make sure there's good music. Maybe have a band for cocktail hour. Put the photo booth. Put the guest book. Make sure that there's something for people to do outside. But those are all easy things. Like adding some sort of entertainment to your cocktail hour doesn't have to be crazy. If it's a more casual wedding, you can add something like cornhole. Like, just add some sort of entertainment. It doesn't have to be expensive. Something easy. Add like pictures of you and your fiance, like big canvases and pictures of them to look at. Just add something for them to do during cocktail hour. But I promise you, they will be okay. If they have food, drinks, and seats, they'll be fine for an hour and a half. Take the time to get the photos and everything that you need, because one of two things is going to happen. You're going to be super rushed and not get the photos that you want, and forget photos and not get everything that you're looking for. Or you're going to take the time to do the photos, and then you're going to run late. You're going to end up taking an hour and a half that wasn't planned for. So now, if your guests are being led into your reception after 1 hour, but you're still out there taking pictures, now they're sitting in the reception space. The bar's probably closed at this point. The food's not being served at this point. So now they're sitting there bored and wondering, why are we here? What's happening? Everyone's running late. So it's going to take the hour and a half. It's just whether you plan for it or not. So that's a mistake that I see all the time, and people fight me on it all the time. But I just think that if you don't do a first look, you need an hour and a half cocktail hour. And I just think people underestimate time. They just underestimate it all the time. And this is what causes a bad wedding day. Not scheduling enough time for vendor setup is another big one. Make sure that if your venue only lets you in at 2:00, does it only let your vendors in at 2:00? If it doesn't let you in till 2:00 and your vendors until 2:00, you can't have a ceremony at 3. You need to do a ceremony at 4 or 5. There's no way vendors can set up in just 30 minutes. If that's the case, it's going to be messy. It's going to be rushed. And the thing is, the vendors, it's just impossible for the vendors to do that unless they have a massive team and you're paying extra for a big team, but it's just not going to happen. So it's going to run late. So you got to just plan accurately to begin with. I know I sound like a broken record, but it's a big thing. People always underestimate the time. So make sure that your vendors have enough time for setup. And then also a mistake that I see is ignoring restrictions. I kind of was talking about this earlier, but if the venue only lets you in at 2:00 or if the venue is kicking you out at a certain time, make sure that you're not ignoring these restrictions. They will follow through with it. If it says it ends at 10, don't think that means 10:15. That means 10. And if it's like, if they have an option to extend, then that's one thing. You can, tell them, hey, when it's 9:45, come to me and ask if I want to extend or not. But if you're doing that, make sure that you're asking your planner, your venue, your bartenders, your DJ, your photographer, your videographer, and be prepared to pay for an extra hour for all of your vendors. They all have families. They're all tired. They want to go home. But money makes them maybe a little willing to stay. You got to pay for them to stay. It's just fair. So if you're willing to pay for them to stay, great. Most vendors are happy to stay 1 hour if you pay for their time. But don't just assume everyone's down to stay an hour late when you decide last minute. That's not fair. And don't assume that the venue is going to let you stay, because you might say, oh no, we're going to stay. And they might say no. And they might unplug that DJ and turn all the lights on and the party is over. And that's kind of an awkward way to end the night. You don't want to be kicked out. That's not the vibe. So those are some common mistakes I see with the timeline. The biggest overall mistake I'd say is just like thinking things are going to take less time than they do. So assume that things are going to take longer than you think and then add buffer time and you should be okay. I'm going to take a quick break and we'll be back in 1 minute, but I'm going to give you some tips on how to make sure that your timeline is perfect when we come back. Okay, welcome back. Now, we just talked about some big mistakes that people make when it comes to their timeline on their wedding day. Let's talk about how to avoid mistakes and what are some things to look out for and create a wedding day timeline that's going to keep everything on track. So, starting the beginning of the day, let's walk through a perfect wedding day timeline. Getting ready. You need to start early for hair, makeup, and getting dressed. A big thing with hair and makeup is you need to ask the artist how many artists are coming. And I suggest that you ask this before you book. Ask them well in advance, hey, if we have 5 people needing hair and makeup, what does that mean? Because it typically will take about 40 minutes for each service. So if you have, I've talked about like a calculator for this before, and it's kind of complicated, but try to hear me out. If it's 40 minutes for hair, 40 minutes for makeup, that's an hour and a half per person. So if you have 5 people, I'm going to use my calculator so I don't make a fool out of myself. If you have 5 people that need an hour and a half per person, that's 7.5 hours of hair and makeup if there's only 1 artist, which is not feasible. So you need to have 2 artists I would say at least 2 artists for 5 people. Often people have 5 bridesmaids and then the bride and then the mom and then the mother of the bride and then a sister and then a this and then a that. And so it adds up really quickly. When you have 8, 10, 15 ladies getting ready and you have hair and makeup for all these people, you need to start really early and you need to plan accordingly and make sure that you have 4 or 5 hair and makeup artists. I also suggest scheduling your hair and makeup to finish at least 1 or 2 hours before the ceremony so that you have time for touch-ups. You have a little breather. You have time to get dressed. And if you're doing a first look, that's going to take time too. So let's talk about the first look. If you're doing one, schedule at least 30 to 45 minutes for this moment. I know you think a first look, it'll take 5 minutes for him to turn around, see me, and then we're done. No, it takes time I was saying this earlier, for you to get in the right spot, for him to get in the right spot, to do the actual turnaround, and then you typically are going to take photos. This is a great photo opportunity. It helps calm your nerves before the ceremony. So schedule at least 30 to 45 minutes for this moment to, really get in place, do it. And this is not a moment that you want to be rushed through. You don't want to have 5 minutes for this. You want to have 30 to 45 minutes to really get in place, do this, and get some nice photos. And then the ceremony. Make sure that you're planning enough buffer time between like all of your activities prior to the ceremony and then the start time of the ceremony. So let's say you're doing a first look in photos. You need to be hidden and tucked away, I say 45 minutes before your ceremony. And I know it's like, what am I going to do for 45 minutes? Well, first of all, this time goes by very quickly. I promise you, it goes by really, really fast. But your guests are going to start arriving about 45 minutes before the ceremony. The bulk is going to be around 30 minutes, but you get a few that's 45 minutes before the ceremony. And if you're outside taking pictures, you're not going to be happy that everyone's seeing you before the ceremony. So make sure that hair and makeup is scheduled to finish on time. So you have time to get dressed. Again, getting a wedding dress on takes longer than you think. So make sure that you have time to get dressed, time for your first look, time for any bridesmaids photos, groomsmen photos, whatever you want to do before, and then schedule for you to be hidden and tucked away about 45 minutes before the ceremony. And then what you want to do is the ceremony timing. Make sure that you schedule enough time between the ceremony and the reception. Again, what I was saying earlier about the first look. If you're doing a first look, you can usually get by with a 1-hour cocktail hour, which is preferable. But if you're not doing a first look, make sure that you schedule enough time between ceremony and reception. I'd say at least an hour and a half, at least. You don't want this to go. This is when things run late, Things run late when people aren't ready on time prior to ceremony. And then during cocktail hour, when photos take longer than people think, which always, always, always takes longer than people think. So make sure you're planning enough time between ceremony and reception. Family and group photos, at least 30 minutes for family and group photos. I would say at least, depending on the size of your family, if you have an average sized family, I would say like 20, 25 minutes for family, 20 minutes for wedding party. If you're not doing a first look, try to do at least you and the bridesmaids, if you're the bride listening, but like you and the bridesmaids together before the ceremony, and then the groom and the groomsmen together before the ceremony. And then during cocktail hour, you can do the whole group of the bridesmaids and groomsmen, but at least like some of those individual shots are all done prior to the ceremony. If that's done and all you have to do is the big group photos, then you can get by with like 15, 20 minutes for the big group photos. But if you haven't done all the individual before, then you need 30 minutes for wedding party. You want 30 minutes at least for the Mr. and Mrs. If you did the first look and you've already had 30 minutes of photos, then maybe you can get by with like 20 more minutes. If you haven't done a first look, you need about 45 minutes for the Mr. and Mrs. photos. And let me tell you, these are the ones that matter the most. These are the ones that end up going last during cocktail hour. You usually do family and then wedding party and then Mr. and Mrs. And those are the most important. So if you're running low on time, it's like that's what's rushed. And those are the most important photos, which is why people say like, well, we need the photos. So then it runs late. They do the photos anyway, but then the whole day is running late. So plan accordingly, please. I repeat, plan accordingly for these photos. Photos take a lot longer than you think. Reception timeline, I would just say have a clear plan. Once dinner is served, you're kind of in the clear. But you want your dinner to be served, hot. No one wants cold chicken. So make sure that you're planning well so that dinner is served on time. If you run late, let's say dinner is supposed to be served at 7:30, but you're running late, so now it's 8:00 by the time dinner's being served. Well, the caterer had the food hot and ready at 7:30. So now it's probably been sitting out or sitting in a warmer or something, probably getting dry or cold for 30 minutes. So are you going to be livid at the caterer that the food wasn't super fresh and hot? Or is it kind of your fault because the timeline took longer than it was supposed to take? So make sure you think about these things. So when it comes to the reception, have a clear plan for when the events are going to happen. The wedding party entrance, is it going to be are just the newly wed couple going to enter, or is the entire wedding party going to enter? Is it going to be just the bridesmaids as a group and the groomsmen as a group, or are they going to go out in pairs where the DJ is saying Sally and Bobby, Megan and Kevin? Like, you have to plan for these things because that takes time. So there's the wedding party entrance, there's the Mr. and Mrs. entrance, and then figure out, are you going into your first dance? Are you doing speeches? I would say, schedule 5 minutes for your first dance. If you're doing parent dances, I schedule 10 minutes for parent dances. If you're doing speeches, I would say plan for about 5 minutes per person. Sometimes I like to do these things after dinner because you never truly know how long it's going to take when people are doing speeches. Some people get up there and talk for 1 minute. Some people will go up there and talk for 10 minutes. And so if you go in to at your reception, I like doing the timeline kind of like wedding party entrance, Mr. and Mrs. entrance. If it's a traditional wedding, then you do your first dance. And then I like going straight into dinner after that. Maybe having one person do like a blessing or something if you want, but not doing all the speeches right away. I like doing your first dance and then let dinner be served because everyone's hungry. Everyone wants to eat. Then once dinner is served and once it's wrapping up, you can do speeches. And that way people are finishing eating while the speeches are going on and you're getting kind of two things done at once. Now, you don't want to serve dinner and immediately do speeches. You want to let people eat because, no one wants to be clunking their fork on the plate and all of that while there's a speech going on. But towards the end of dinner, you can have the speeches started to kind of get the ball rolling again. Because if there's nothing at the end of dinner, it's kind of like, when does the party get started again? And so I like having the speeches, and then you could go into parent dances. And once the parent dances are wrapped up, there's already something on the dance floor. There's already music playing, and the DJ can kind of crank it up and invite everybody to the dance floor once the parent dances are done. Or sometimes you can go right into cake cutting, and that kind of gets the party started. But again, we're talking about the timeline here. The reason I like doing that is because it keeps the timeline going. And then once dinner is served, it doesn't matter so much. If your maid of honor decides to talk for 10 minutes, it's not the end of the world because dinner's already served. All the big things of the day are done. So if she wants to talk and talk, she can. Your guests might get a little antsy, but at least they have a full belly. If someone's chatting on and on and on and your guests are hungry, they're going to get hangry. If they have food already, they're probably a little bit more open to listening to the speeches and, going with the flow at that point. It doesn't matter so much. So I would definitely, when you're thinking about the timeline for the reception, that's what I would do. Entrance, first dance, dinner, and then speeches and parent dances. Just make sure that you plan enough time, no matter what the order you're going to do. I would say about 5 minutes for the entrance, 5 minutes for first dance. I like 10 minutes for parent dances and about 10 minutes for speeches, unless I would say 5 minutes per speech. So if you have 3 people talking, I would say maybe plan for 15 minutes. If you have 4 people talking, maybe plan for 20 minutes. And then you have to think, like, when you're like, I want this person to talk and this person to talk, that's a lot of time of speeches. So anyway, do what you want, but plan accordingly. And make sure you work closely with your DJ and your planner to make sure that there's no dead time and that the energy of the reception stays upbeat. It's really awkward to have silence. A couple weeks ago when I had DJ Ivanko on, we were talking about this, and he said, like, silence is really awkward. And then we were both quiet for probably like 5 seconds. I just counted to 5 and that felt really awkward. So imagine like a whole minute of silence. It's more noticeable than you think. And then the last part of the night is the end of night. If you're planning for a grand exit, make sure that your vendors have time to get out all your guests in order. Make sure, so if your end of night is 10 o'clock and you're doing a grand exit, you need to do your last song by 9:45 because it's going to take 5-10 minutes to get your guests lined up for the grand exit. Then you have to do the grand exit, and then your vendors have to clean up. So coordinate with your photographer to capture those final moments, whether it's a sparkler exit or a private last dance. Make sure that you're coordinating your photographer, your DJ, your planner, so that all of this is according to plan. But again, you can't assume if your wedding ends at 10 that the last song is going to be at 10 and then you're going to do this grand exit that takes 15-20 minutes. It always takes 15-20 minutes. So make sure that you're planning accordingly. All right, I'm going to take another quick break and we will be right back to talk about how I personally handle some of these things and how, like, if you're working with Delightful Planning, how we make sure that your timeline is correct according to your day. All right, welcome back. We've talked about mistakes people make with the timeline. We've talked about things to look out for and kind of how I like to plan a timeline. But let's talk about how I personally make timelines with my clients, and maybe this will help you, or maybe I can help you. So it's hard to give a general timeline, like one standard timeline, because every wedding is so different. And so what I do, what Delightful Planning specializes in, is creating custom timelines that account for all the little details to make your day perfect. From getting ready in the morning to the last dance at night, we ensure that every moment is timed to perfection. I talk to you when you're my client, I'm gonna ask all the details. We're gonna get to know each other really, really well. Last week I talked about getting to know, like, and trust your vendors. Well, guess what? I need to get to know you. I'm going to get to know your family. Give me the scoop. Give me the tea. Do you have, are your parents married? Are they divorced? Do you have step parents? Do you have grandparents? Do they walk well? Is grandma in a wheelchair? Is grandma in a walker? Are they walking down the aisle? What is happening? Do you have a sister that you no longer talk to, but it's your wedding, so you invited her? Is there going to be something awkward? For photos, who's going to be in photos? Your mom has a new boyfriend, but you don't want that boyfriend in your family photo. So we need to get your mom in the photo, but not the boyfriend. Or we can let him in for one photo, but he's going to be kicked out for another photo. I talk to my clients about all these details. I don't care what the answer is. I am not here to judge anybody, but I'm going to talk to you about all of the details. And if I'm not working with you, that's a mistake, because everyone needs to work with me. But obviously, I'm joking, but you need to think about these things. You need to look at your family and see what's the deal here. Where are there issues that might pop up? Where are there things that are going to take longer? And then look at your vendor contracts. Look at your venue. What time are you allowed out in? What time do you have to be out? Is your photographer package 7 hours, 8 hours, 10 hours? If you're locked into only like a 6-hour wedding photography package and you're not willing to extend it, well, how are you going to make this day work in just 6 hours? And so these are things that I look for. I get to know all the details and really try to customize the timeline for every couple. I also want to talk to all the vendors and make sure that everyone is on the same page. I'll coordinate directly with your vendors and make sure everyone knows when they need to be somewhere, where they need to be, so you don't have to worry about a thing. Once I find out all of the details, I will read all your contracts, find out everything about your family, then we'll put together a perfect timeline for your day, and then I'll communicate it with all of your vendors. I've done this again and again. Building the timelines is, like, honestly one of my favorite things, because it's really what puts the wedding day together, and a good timeline can make sure that the day is really smooth. And that's honestly, like, the biggest thing that causes people to have a bad day or a good day is when the timeline is either good or bad. And of course, last week I was talking about the vendors, making sure that you have a good vendor team. A good vendor team is going to care about a good timeline. It goes hand in hand. And a good vendor team is going to follow your timeline, is going to work well with a planner and follow the timeline that they say. And a good planner is going to ask your vendors, hey, what do you think? How much time do you need? It's a big collaborative process. But anyway, if you just take one thing away, look at your timeline, add buffer time, and plan for things to take longer than you would think. Make sure that you're really thinking about the logistics of getting to and from places, getting dressed, adding time to go to the bathroom, adding time to get some water. It makes a world of a difference. So anyway, if you're feeling overwhelmed by the thought of putting together a timeline for your wedding day, don't stress. I am here to help. Let's create a custom timeline that ensures your day runs smoothly from start to finish. Your wedding day should be a time of joy, not stress. Let me take care of the timeline so you can focus on your big day. That's what I'm here for. It's what I love to do. Again, I do free consultations. So we can talk. You can tell me what you're worried about. I can try to see how I can be a best fit. Obviously, I am based in Palm Beach. If you're looking for like wedding planning, I would love to help you. I'm open to travel. But if you're just like, hey, can you help me with your timeline? Yeah, I'd love to. Let's hop on a call, figure out what you're looking for, and maybe we can do some sort of package that's just virtual, like coaching or virtual planning for your wedding. I'm here. I try to really accommodate everybody and help everybody. So reach out. Follow me on Instagram, Sydney underscore, or I'm sorry, follow my Instagram. It's not Sydney. It's delightful_planning. TikTok's delightful planning. My email is sydney@delightfulplanning.com. But I hope you guys have a great wedding day. I hope wedding planning is going well for you. Thanks for listening to The Wedding Buzz. Don't forget to follow us on Instagram, subscribe so you don't miss out on any future tips and tricks to make sure that your wedding day is as smooth and flawless as possible. See you guys next time.